News every 15 minutes, weather every 10, and sports twice an hour.
Newstalk, KGVO, AM 1290 and 101.5 FM.
You're listening to Montana Morning with Peter Christian.
A disturbing relationship between methamphetamine, domestic violence, and homicide. Good morning, everyone. It's Montana Morning. It is Friday, May 20th, 2016. The sky mostly cloudy right now, and we have 43 degrees in Missoula. This newscast is sponsored by the Mustard Seed Asian Cafe, located in Southgate Mall. Missoula County Attorney Kirsten Pabst revealed a startling statistic yesterday in the relationship between methamphetamine and other drug use and domestic violence in Missoula and in Montana.
The reason why we take such a hardline stance on domestic violence cases, and it showed that in 2013 to 14, approximately half of the homicides in Montana were attributable to domestic violence.
Pabst said people are dying in Montana through the relationship between drugs like methamphetamine and domestic violence.
80 to 90% of our current dependent and neglect cases involving child protective actions involve methamphetamine use with the parents. It's huge. The meth increases, they increase the incidence of neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse, as well as the environmental exposure of the toxins to the children.
Pabst said most of the methamphetamine being bought and sold in Missoula is not homemade or even from Spokane or Seattle.
The methamphetamine is coming from the super labs in Mexico. So the law enforcement community, of course, we're doing what we can to deal with this, what I would call an epidemic. But until the cartels in the super labs in Mexico can be controlled, we're not going to see a reduction in the supply, and sadly probably not too much of a reduction in the use and abuse of the drug here in Missoula.
Scott Allen Price and Sarah McKnight, the individuals charged with robbery and murder in December and the death of Lynette Keener, stated that during the incidents that occurred that day, the two were high on methamphetamine. It was also alleged that Emmanuel Gomez, the man accused of beating Charlie Ann Wyrick to death and dumping her body in Patty Canyon last December, was also under the influence of methamphetamine when those crimes were committed. A man who skipped out on parole after being released early from a life sentence for a 1951 murder conviction and was returned to custody in 2010 has been denied release for the second year in a row. The Great Falls Tribune reports the Montana Board of Pardons and Parole denied Frank Dryman's request for release yesterday. The 85-year-old, who is on oxygen and has other health conditions, has asked to be moved to an assisted living facility for veterans. Dryman was given a life sentence after being found guilty in the shooting death of Clarence Pellet near Shelby 65 years ago. He was paroled in 1969 and moved to California before disappearing in 1971. Dryman was discovered in Arizona after 38 years on the run. In conjunction with a notice of appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the Attorney General's office has filed a request with the Federal District Court in Helena seeking a stay of that portion of Judge Lovell's ruling addressing campaign contributions from political parties. The Commissioner of Political Practices has already determined that the contribution limits of Montana's previous statute for other types of contributions will be in effect as the result of Judge Lovell's rulings. However, Jonathan Modell is deeply concerned about the lack of spending limits on political parties.
The Commissioner's office doesn't have authority to reinstate a pre-existing limit for political party contributions because that pre-existing limit is less than the one that the court struck. What that basically means is that there are no limits on what political parties can give candidates, and that is the most troublesome part of this order.
The stay that the state is requesting would not change that determination, but if granted, would mean that the limits for contributions by political parties would remain as set under the challenged statutes during the appeal. On Tuesday of this week, as we mentioned, Montana Political Practices Modell, Jonathan Modell, Commissioner, dismissed campaign finance charges against former gubernatorial candidate Rick Hill. In the past, Hill's attorney Matthew Monforton has accused Modell of partisanship, but he's recently raised the bar and says Modell was using extortion.
What made this so outrageous is he could have and should have disposed of this case back in October of 2012 when it was filed. And instead, he let it sit over Rick for 4 years. The reason he did that was to try to extort money from Rick.
The money in question, about $200,000, left in Hill's campaign war chest from an initial $500,000 donation from the Montana Republican Party.
Commissioner Modell called me last fall and said, look, your client has $1.5 million exposure. He's got a couple of $100,000. Yeah, we know it should go back to the Republican Party where it rightfully belongs, but why don't you consider paying that to me, Commissioner Modell, so that your client doesn't face any jeopardy.
On top of partisanship and extortion, Monforden also accused Modal of selective prosecution and hinted that he might be charged with contempt of court for reverting some of Montana campaign finance limits back to older and sometimes even lower spending limits. Details on the Billings campaign appearances on behalf of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have been released. Former President Bill Clinton is scheduled to speak at Will James Middle School at 7:30 Friday night on behalf of his wife's campaign. Trump's campaign announced the presumptive Republican nominee will hold a rally Thursday, May 26th at 4 p.m. at Rimrock Auto Arena at Metro Park. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders held rallies in Missoula and Billings last week as he continues to campaign for the Democratic nomination. Montana's primary election will be held June 7th. The state has 27 Democratic and 27 Republican delegates at stake. Northwestern Energy is bringing government and energy industry officials together here in Missoula for the Clean and Affordable Energy Conference over at the Holiday Inn. KGVO News caught up with keynote speaker Governor Steve Bullock following his address to the conference yesterday.
Ultimately, our energy future is in our hands. We need to figure out ways to provide opportunity as we go forward. So that's good jobs and a diverse energy future. I mean, I think the one thing that we all know for sure is the future is going to look different than what today is. And it's up to all of us, I think, to try to help sort of chart that future.
Also at the conference, former Public Service Commissioner Gail Gucci is again running for the office. She emphasized the importance of energy conservation.
It's the cheapest energy we have by far is the energy we never use. And we can have energy conservation in two ways. The utilities can actually conserve lots of energy, and individual customers of those utilities can conserve energy.
The conference continues in Missoula through today at the Holiday Inn downtown. Attorneys for an oil company say the company should not have been criminally charged for an accidental oil spill that its employees took immediate steps to fix when it was discovered. Last month, FX Drilling and Field Supervisor Quay Geza Torok pleaded not guilty to charges of negligent discharge of oil into waters of the United States and failure to immediately notify federal authorities. Federal prosecutors say the company at Torok failed to clean up the spill after they discovered the leak in June of 2011 in an oil field on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. On Wednesday, attorneys for the company and Torok asked a federal judge to dismiss the charges. They say failing to remove oil is not a crime under the federal Clean Water Act. And authorities say a 15-year-old boy hunting a black bears with his father mistakenly shot and killed a 500-pound male grizzly bear in eastern Idaho. The Idaho Department of Fish and Game said the father and son from California later that evening on May 5th returned to their family cabin and realized it was a grizzly bear. Authorities say the next morning they contacted Idaho Fish and Game to report what happened. Fish and Game officials in a news release yesterday say the juvenile has been issued a warning and the father a citation for the taking in possession of a protected species. A court date has been set for June 1st. Our News Talk time, 6:13.
News Talk, KGVO.
Missoula's official weather station.
The unsettled weather continues today with showers and isolated thunderstorms. Highs will top out in the upper 50s all the way through the weekend, with rain remaining in the forecast through early next week. I'm meteorologist Brooke Foster for Missoula's KECI 13.